Well, thanks for having me, men. I thought I would be more nervous for this moment, especially after how fluid Jared is up here and Joe selling tickets. But honestly, when I look around here, I'm more comfortable than I thought I was. And my dad, Jeff, is here. So he has no idea what I'm about to say. So I don't think I'm probably the most nervous guy in the room. So thanks for being here and good luck. Maybe just, if you'll indulge me, and just to tell a quick story about last night. I'm a big fan of Jim Valvano, college basketball coach, very charismatic. If you know about him, he gave a famous speech in the ESPYs right before he died of cancer. My grandpa went through a hard bout with cancer, and so every year for the Jimmy V Classic, I would turn this on, and at halftime they would play his speech. And he tells a great story about his first year coaching for Rutgers. And he drew this from Vince Lombardi, and as a Packer fan, I love this story. So Vince Lombardi, right before the season, he's pacing outside the locker room, and he's got this really inspirational speech for his team. And so he goes in the locker room and he says, "Men, all eyes on me." And so they all look up at him, and he's standing up on a pedestal, and he says, "If we want to be successful this year, we're going to focus on three things and three things only: God, family, and the Green Bay Packers." And so Jimmy Valvano's telling the story, and he says, I'm gonna do this. I'm a 26-year-old coach, coaching, 18 to 22-year-old basketball players. He goes, "This is gonna fire him up. I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna be, inspirational." So he's pacing outside, and they're like, "Coach, we got 10 minutes to tip." So he's like, no, just wait. We're gonna build suspense. So he's pacing, and "Coach, we got 3 minutes left." Okay. So he goes to slam open the doors, and wham! Hurts his arm, falls to the floor, doors fly open, and he's just laying there flopping around. And so they pick him back up, and he says, "Men, all eyes on me. If we're going to be successful this year, we're going to focus on three things and three things only." And he's got in his head, right? He's got God, family, Rutgers basketball. And he's this Italian, so you can just feel the presence. And he stands up and he says, "Men, all eyes on me. If we're going to be successful this year, we're going to focus on three things and three things only: God, family, and the Green Bay Packers." And so here I am preparing for this today, and we'll get to my story, sorry. And I'm sitting there going, I think I got this, faith, family, Fiegen Construction. This is good. So last night I grabbed my son, 7 years old, loves the Packers with me, and I'm like, "Oliver, here, let me try this out on you." So I'm pacing up and down, and I'm like, "All right, here we go." So he said, "This is what I'm gonna say to these guys, I'm going to look out and be nervous, but I'm going to say, 'Men, today I'm going to tell you my story, and it's going to focus on three things and three things only.'" And he's looking up at me, 7-year-old. And I said, "Faith, family, and the Green Bay Packers." And he does this. Just, "Really, Dad? You're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers?" So anyways, again, thanks for coming. I'm Lucas Fiegen, Vice President and Director of Architecture at Fiegen Construction. The company's 55 years old, started by my grandpa in the late 60s. But I want to tell you a little bit about kind of the timeline of my life. And it's not long. I'm 33 years old, which is also why I'm nervous speaking to all you men. But hopefully there's something today that I can say that, you can draw from. So, growing up as a kid, I was pretty fortunate, and I say that as humbly as I can. But we had a small Catholic family. I was the oldest of two. I had a sister 3 years younger than me. We went to church every Sunday at Holy Spirit. We were in the public school system, and so we went to CCD on Wednesdays. We never really experienced great loss. We didn't really have a big death in the family until my grandpa passed of cancer in 2009. We just kind of kept going on, right? And I say, humbly say I was fortunate because I didn't know it at the time, but my dad worked really, really hard. I can remember as a kid, you just, to spend time, good time with him was in the office. He had these model cranes, and I would go and, he's probably getting work done. I don't know that. I'm just playing with cranes and getting to hang out around Grandpa and my dad and my uncle. And so, there wasn't a lot of struggle there. And, because of his work ethic, you realize that later in life. He's instilling in you values that you probably, take for granted. In 6th grade, they moved us into the Catholic school system. Public school, elementary ends in 5th. And so we went to St. Mary's. My sister was a 3rd grader. And it's hard to transition, with friends, kind of acclimating yourself. But I was active in sports. I played every sport I could as a kid, just a fanatic for sports. And so I had built relationships with other kids from other schools through kind of that world. And that made it easier, especially going into high school. And if you guys know, I graduated in 2006, and some of these guys in this room know who I played with: Dusty Coleman, Tyler Schulte, Levi Pohl. I mean, winning was in our blood, thanks to those guys. And so, again, I never really got to experience loss. And that's that's a weird thing that you should probably learn as a kid. But we just won. We never lost a football game. We won, state football titles, state basketball titles. It was just kind of fortunate in that way. One of the things when I was younger, my dad put me to work. There were, sports were my life, but he also knew that there would come a day when, sports would end. And so when I was 14 years old, right or wrong, I don't even know if this is legal, I was on job sites and just pushing a broom and not running heavy machinery. But so I would go to scrimmage in the mornings, and then when my friends would go off and play in the afternoons or go to the pools, I would go to the job site, and it instilled a level of I call it grit that again, at the time, I didn't know that's what was happening. I think you find out later in life some of these things that, are put in front of you by your parents. And so I didn't care for that. Obviously, I wanted to be, jumping into pools with my buddies and playing video games. But instead, I was, sweeping job sites and pouring concrete at a young age. What that did, though, is gave me this passion and loyalty to want to work for the family business. I can say I always knew. Well, I guess at first I wanted to be a lawyer when I was really young, but then I found out how much you had to read, and that went out the window. But so when I went into college, there was there was a couple of routes you could go: construction management. I could have went to business school, but I ultimately chose architecture. I liked the creative side of it. It was a 4-year undergraduate and 2-year graduate school degree to get your master's. So I went that route. I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, toured a couple others, but ultimately, the oldest of 2, and the first in my family to graduate from a 4-year college, just because at the time, there weren't those opportunities for my dad and my uncle. They grew up working in the business. I think they tried to go to school, and Grandpa needed them, so they just came back and worked their way through. So went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, spent 6 years there, and again, this core value of grit came up. My freshman year, we had 400 students. And when I graduated in 2012 with my master's, my class was 40. So it was hard, but just kind of stuck with it. There was a path there that my grandpa, my dad, my uncle had paved for me that I needed to just stick with it. So I did. And college was great. I turned into a night owl. We had a lot of projects. There was a lot of late night in studio, putting these projects together. Fortunately for me, they had Newman Center had 10 p.m. Sunday masses. And I can remember, thinking, wow, this was genius by them, I mean, they were packed, right? I don't know how many, if, maybe a couple my freshman year when I actually went to, 8 or 9 a.m. mass at the Newman Center. They were always 10 p.m. on Sunday. It worked great for me. I can remember the moment in my life where my faith changed, and it was at the Newman Center. And you have to kind of understand the diocese down there was one of the most conservative in the nation. And it's an odd combination with a university where, for the most part, it's pretty liberal. And so I remember one mass, it was 10 o'clock. I was tired from a week of, putting a project together, kind of crunching. And I showed up, and again, packed to the gills, standing room only. And the priest got up and his homilies just started sort of lecturing everyone. And he ultimately said, if you've excessively drank, if you've fornicated, if you've lied to your brothers and sisters, and he just kept listing off all these sins, he said, don't come up for communion. And again, he probably said it in a much better way, but that's what I heard. And it was one of the most awkward instances where about 2 people went up for communion. I mean, I can just remember it clearly. It was so strange, and everyone's just kind of looking around the room like, am I supposed to go? I mean, I had a couple drinks, and so I sort of lost my faith at that moment, and it's sad to say, it was, again, I was busy with school. I was in a fraternity at the time, having fun, and I just lost my way. So when I got out of school, I was still working summers for Fiegen Construction. I would come back, and that's when I got more hands-on with concrete, and I was an iron worker for one summer, just earning my stripes within the family business. We all did it. Grandpa went out to New York and became an iron worker, and that's how he built the business. And so my dad, my uncle did it, and I did it as well. But later in my college years, I got to transition into the office and start working with the architecture department, because ultimately that's where I would end up. So post-college, I get back, and I just didn't have a purpose. And I think for, most of us, you need that purpose to drive you to want to excel. And for me, I didn't have that purpose because there was nothing about my faith that was driving that. And so I get back into work, and I had a director, a gentleman that had been with us for 12, 15 years. He was the head of the architecture program for us, and he didn't really push me. I don't know if it was because of my last name that he wanted to hold me back or what it was, but now that he is no longer with us, I can see that there was something there holding me back. And for me, it was great, right? It was easy street. I show up and work 8 to 5 and just kind of go about my business. He'd hand me some, tasks, and I would do them. But there was no purpose behind any of that. And I think, again, you need that, and it drives from faith that really pushes that home. And so I wasn't going to Mass. I lived with 2 buddies from high school, and we essentially had another college house. We were, having fun going out Thursday, Friday, Saturdays. I was just cruising, and it was just that for me. I would go to Mass when, my mom and dad would pester me to come over for lunch or dinner, and I'd go to Mass with them, but there was no meaning behind it. And I'd ultimately just kind of lost my faith at that point. And so we flash forward to, a year or 2 of that. I had gotten to the point where I could start taking my exams to become a licensed architect, and there was no rush for me. I'll get to them. I got this cushy job, and I really started to take advantage of kind of that legacy that Jeff and Rusty had put forth after, my grandpa had passed. And so 2014 was my moment of redemption. I didn't know it at the time, but I got a call one day, and it was that I was a father, and it was a surprise to me, and it was a really scary time, especially when you don't have the meaning of faith behind you. And so I can remember, you lean on the rocks in your life, and you really find out who your friends are. And so I remember calling my sister, and I'm a mess, and I'm like, what do I do? She was my rock there, and she's like, well, you gotta tell mom and dad. If you don't tell them, I'm gonna tell them. And it's so I can remember that night we had family dinner, and I told my parents that I had a son, and I had only met him once, and it was life-changing, and I can, my mom was a wreck. She was crying, didn't know what to say. My dad was very businesslike, just hundreds of questions. Do you have this figured out? But I didn't. I was scared. I was embarrassed. There was this imperfect reality that set in. And again, I grew up never with any sort of loss. I didn't know how to handle any of that. And it's hard to say this is a loss, right, when I look back now. But at the time, it felt like that. And I was embarrassed. I was scared. But most importantly, I was unprepared. I thought I was living my best life. And I took that call and met my 6-month-old son, Oliver. And my dad came over that night, and I was in the basement, and we had one of our father-son talks, and he was the first to say, this is your time for redemption. This is the time for you to step up and really own this, and that's what I did. I went back to my value of grit and said, I can do this, and so it forced me to grow up very quickly. And I wrote down after Mass today, the responsorial psalm, how great are the works of the Lord. And that's what this was. It was, it was a time in my life where I went back to faith principles and, leaning on those rocks, and I call them my square squad. They're the people in my life that when anything comes up, you can go back to. And so today, so we fast forward to today. I shortly after finding out about my son, I purchased a house on my own. First house I'd ever owned. I started taking my exams. 13 months of studying and testing to pass 7 exams. I was back on track, and it felt good. I was raising a son. I didn't read any parenting books. Nowadays they say you're supposed to let the kid cry, and that's sleep training. I didn't know that, but I was doing that. I can remember, he'd be screaming in his crib, and I'd just kind of be peeking through the door like, is it ever going to stop? But today, I'm a licensed architect. I have been for about 5 years, and I'm part of this generational transition now, working alongside my dad and my uncle. And it's so cool to experience from my perspective, because what once was this authoritative culture, and that's no disrespect to the way that they lead, that's just their generation of put your nose down and work. And now we're to a culture so much more about human dignity, and wanting to be a part of the team, not just being told what to do. And I think that's important to understand, both personally and professionally. We've started to meet as an ownership group of 4 now, each year to talk about strategic objectives. And the first year we did that, we're a 50-year-old company, and we didn't have core values. We didn't have a mission statement. We just kind of went with the flow and worked hard, and that's what I learned most. But now there's so much more, and people want to be involved, and so we did talk a lot about what are our core values. We had to do some deep diving, and and performance reviews. Performance reviews were a big thing, because what once was, I'm going to sit down with you and grade you on how you've done this past year for the company, they allowed me the freedom to create a review in which we talk about goal setting with our employees. We talk about a personal development goal. I mean, their understanding was, we're okay with the goal setting, but how does that help Fiegen? I said that personal goal setting has nothing to do with Fiegen. If coworker X wants to buy a house this year, we're going to help him do that, because we have the resources as leaders to do that. And I think that's so big with this cultural shift that we're experiencing. So I was trying to create my own stamp on this transition, and one of the things I've learned is you have to have a self-awareness, because this is bigger than yourself. There's times that I want to kick my dad and my uncle to the curb and say, let me take the reins, but that's the reality of it. Is I'm not ready for that, and I need them there, and I think someday I'll look back and miss working side by side with my dad. I think that's one of the huge benefits of a family business. Where else are we at here? So I think, one of the big things is this item of action and integrity versus just verbally wanting to get things done. And so we've started to, meet and talk about those things. And again, this family business is so great to be a part of. I always wanted to be in it, but I never realized the legacy of a family business until I had a son, and got to see that, and what you're working for becomes much more than yourself. And I think that moment in my life really changed me for the better. It's great being able to come and share things like this with you men, and the VBL discussions are incredible. And I don't know if I would have had that today without that moment in my life. So again, how great are the works of the Lord. Maybe in closing, I have no idea how we're doing on time, but maybe in closing, I'll share with you something I started a couple years ago, and I carry this around with me every day, and it's my personal manifesto. It's something that I have a coach that I work with on some of these strategic objectives, and she helped me kind of put this together. And what it does is each year you really sit back and reflect. It changes every single year. I have my Square Squad on here. Some people don't even know they're in my Square Squad, but just a reminder of who those people are that got you to this place today. I have my goals for the year. I have a theme. This year's theme was patience. Sometimes I try to get ahead of myself with a lot of these things I've talked about today, and you just have to have the patience for that. It's got a quote on here that I thought, reflected patience really well. When I was in school, we visited the Vatican and went through the Sistine Chapel, and after doing a little more research, I found this quote that says, "You don't need to create a masterpiece every day. You need to just get some oil on the canvas." And so I just thought that was great. It just reminds me to slow down and go, little by little. But the biggest thing I have on here is my priorities. And I'm a big Notre Dame guy, and so Lou Holtz is one that says you can judge a man's character on his priorities. Allegedly, if you want to try to get a minute with Lou Holtz, he asks you if you have your priorities on you. And so now I do. So if I ever run into Lou. But my priorities have not really wavered since 2014. And the three that I have on here are faith, family, and Fiegen Construction. So thanks for having me.